Okay, good afternoon, class. How is everybody? So, thank you for attending today's poetry class. So, for today, we are going to talk about, yes, let's look back. So, for most of you guys, if you're really into literature, you probably know most, if not all, of the famous poets, okay, that are in this PowerPoint. So for some of you who are not very familiar with them, let's look at some famous poets throughout the years. So for today's class, we will just look into some ancient poets. Okay, and maybe if we still have time, we will look at some classical poets. Okay, so let's start with the ancient ones. So let's start with Homer. So, for most of you guys, this name sounds very familiar because it is associated or it is attributed to two very famous epic poems. So, in our previous class, we talked about the different types of poems, and one of them is epic. So, can someone mention what an epic is? Okay, thank you very much. Yes, it is. So again, okay, Homer, okay, we have here is very much known for authoring the Iliad and the Odyssey. So the Iliad and the Odyssey, okay, for most of you guys, okay, again, especially with the Odyssey, this is very familiar as this has been portrayed in so many movies, okay, throughout the years. I think the latest no. I'm sorry. There. So, Homer, okay, was very significant during the 8th century. And he is also considered the greatest of the ancient Greek poets. So, how so? Because there are countless Greek poets, right? But he is one, or he is considered the greatest amongst all of them. So his works greatly influenced the shaping of the Greek culture and literature. So let's look at some of his poems. Yeah, sorry. This is a picture, a stone sculpture of Homer. Of course, we cannot find an actual picture of him, but this is how he is depicted in sculpture. So let's look at the Iliad. So for most of you guys, if you are fond of watching movies and you have watched stories about the Trojan War, okay, it's very much attributed to the Iliad, the epic poem, the Iliad. So it recounts the events of the final weeks of the Trojan War. So if you're very familiar with the Trojan War, how it all started, how it all ended, okay, there. You would probably have an idea what the Iliad is all about. So, it also mentions here, it mentions a lot about Achilles. So if you are familiar again with the Trojan War, you would probably know who Achilles is, right? And his famous, um, how should we term this? He is very much famous for evading or for always overcoming battles. So there, it explores the theme of glory, wrath, homecoming, and faith. There. Okay, so here is a picture of a depiction of the gods descending to battle. So the Greeks, just like the Romans, they are very much famous for their gods and goddesses. So before we move on to the next one, the Odyssey, just like the Iliad, is very famous. Okay, again, movies were made out or portrayed about the Odyssey or the journey. So if the Iliad talks about the final weeks of the Trojan War, the battles, portrayals of what happened during the final weeks. The Odyssey talks about homecoming. Okay, it portrays the fate, the journey of Odysseus. Okay, from winning, or after the Trojan War, and his journey home to his son and wife. It talks about him having to suffer a lot before finally reaching home, because he went against the gods. So the gods played tricks on him, which eventually led him to spend years and years and years and years at sea, encountering many events before finally getting home to his son and wife. Okay, let's move on to another famous ancient poet. Okay, so this time it's a female, it's a woman, by the name of Sappho. So we do not often hear about famous poets, except maybe for, but if you have heard about Virginia Woolf, now she, I guess, is a contemporary poet. But in the during the ancient period, there are, or we hear, or we often read about, most of them are men, okay, or male. Okay, so one famous, or Sappho, is very much known for his uh, poem in the form of a prayer to Aphrodite, the goddess of love. Okay, so again, the Greeks are very famous for their beliefs in their many gods. Okay, so a prayer, her poem, a prayer to Aphrodite, is from a speaker who longs for the attention of an unnamed woman. Okay, so maybe unrequited love, should we say? So there, it is set in Sapphic, okay, stanzas, okay, Sapphic, okay, named after Sappho, in which three identical longer lines are followed by a fourth shorter one. So again, this is a stone sculpture of Sappho with curly hair. I'm sorry, it's not a prayer to Aphrodite, an ode to Aphrodite. So guys, if you have time, you can look into this, read it, and then that would be your homework for today. I'll give you further instructions later. So there, now let's move on. Now this time, let's share from the ancient to classical literature. So if the name Geoffrey Chaucer, most probably you probably have not heard about him, right? Okay, but just looking at his famous poem, okay, you would, oh, sorry, he is known for authoring the Canterbury Tales. Okay, so what is this Canterbury Tales all about? Now, the Canterbury Tales are mostly written in verses, although some are written in prose. It is presented as a part of a storytelling contest by a group of pilgrims as they traveled from London to Canterbury to visit the shrine of St. Thomas Becket of Canterbury Cathedral. So, Canterbury is a place in the United Kingdom. So, during medieval times, okay, when church and state were one, okay, we have they if we look at history, there were many persecutions and unjust happenings during those times. So this, or the Canterbury Tales, okay, is a form of satire. So it's a social satire. Okay, so it was set in medieval society. Okay, the it talks about the nobility, the church, and the peasantry. So unlike today, wherein most countries or nations have equal rights, in the past that is not possible. So the rich are really rich. They are the entitled ones, okay, including the church, and the social class was very much, how should we say this? Its social class was very much significant during those days. So Chaucer's satire targets all of the segments of the medieval social issues, human immorality and the depraved heart. So the Canterbury Tales, that's why it's tales, because these are a series of tales written in poem. Okay, so it targeted all of the social classes during those times. The rich ones, the nobilities. I'm sorry, the nobility. That includes the monarchy, okay, the church, of course, and the poor or the common people. Okay, so we will talk more about some, or we will look into segments of these or this poem. Okay, so there. Now, for the last one, and in our next meeting, we will still look at some famous poems. But for today, that would be it. Okay, there. We will talk about William Shakespeare and the rest on our next meeting. So, I hope you have learned something today. So, please, for your homework, no, instead of going back to Sappho's Ode, as I've mentioned earlier, please look into some works, because William Shakespeare is very, very famous. I guess most of you guys, if not all of you, have heard about him, right? You have watched movies portrayed from his famous poems. One of them is Romeo and Juliet. What else? Okay, so for your homework, which will be submitted on our next meeting, please look into some of William Shakespeare's famous poems, okay, and write an opinion, okay, of what you no 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 a reflection a reflection paper on what you have read. Okay, so there are many, many poems by written by Shakespeare. So as much as possible, please do not copy from one another. Right? Do you have any questions? Do you have some questions? Okay, so if there are no questions, that is it for today. Okay, so for our next meeting, we will still talk about some famous poets before we look at, or before we talk about poems, the different types of poems and how they are written. So please read further on those and share your ideas on our next class. Thank you so much for your time and have a great day.